everyone. This is Kim Schmidt with Farm Equipment Magazine. Thanks for joining us for our next Farm Equipment Thought Leader series. Today we have Scott Hoober, one of the owners of Hoober Inc. with us. And Scott has spent about the last 10 years on the Case IH Dealer Advisory Board. So we wanted to talk with you a little bit about just some of the things that those advisory boards do. We've had some questions over the years, about kind of the role they really do play. So just wanted to pick your brain about it a little bit. So I guess to start off, could you just give us a little bit of background about the time you spent on that board?
Sure, Kim. It was a 10-year period, and part of it was I was with with the other dealers that were on the board at the time, and there was about 15 to 17 at any given time of dealers from across the United States that were on the board. And I had a fair amount of time working with the board, and at times even, I was the assistant chair of the board and then chair of the board also the last 3 years. So okay. Pretty good experience, with the group. And, I think with that experience, there was good things and there was bad things about it, as any board is going to be. And, some people, say, well, is this effective? Isn't it effective? And I think I could look back across the last 10 years and I can tell you there was successes and there was failures. Right. But I would tell you, I would suspect that would be with any advisory board. And I want to emphasize that it is an advisory board. I think people go into it with the wrong, in a lot of cases, people go into it with the wrong type of expectations of what it's going to be.
Expecting too much or not expecting it to be not much at all?
I would say probably more expecting it too much. Okay. And probably because it's from our own experiences. Most of the people that are on the board were, are owners of their own company or on their board of their own company, where they're making real financial decisions on a regular basis. And this is quite different than that. This is more an advisory type thing, and in many cases, it was discussed that what is the expectations for this board, and I think it helped to calibrate what is our purpose of being there, and what can we help do, and what can we be productive at. Right. So. I think all in all, from my perspective, I felt like it was a positive experience, and we'll talk a little bit more into detail probably about what exactly I felt was positive and what I think is also the challenges for anything that comes along with something like this.
Yeah. Okay. So then what are, could you go through a little bit in your experience, what that role was the advisory board plays?
Yeah, I would say in most cases, we went through the farm equipment business from A to Z as much as possible. Anywhere from talking about specific equipment and equipment challenges, or all the way down to programs, financing, warranties, parts, service things. It was pretty much the gamut. I mean, if there was something that the relationship that goes on between the dealer and the OEM on a regular basis, it's being discussed. And so it was a lot of material. In most cases, it was a lot of material.
Okay. And what was, the frequency that group is getting together to discuss various topics?
We would get together twice a year, once in the winter and once in the summer, which worked out fairly well with the timing of how busy we were and our schedules. So that worked usually fairly well. Okay.
I imagine that's probably similar to most.
I would think so. If you try to do it once in a year, it's just, it's hard to pick up any kind of momentum or continuity if you try to do it just once a year. Right. So twice a year, I felt like it was okay to me.
Okay. And then what sort of issues or decisions does that board, have influence over for the OEM?
Yeah, I hesitate at decisions because I don't, it's not a board to make decisions.
Right. That's true.
and I think that's where a lot of times people get frustrated because they want it to be a board to make decisions, and it's in most cases it's an advisory. We're there for the OEM to say, this is what we're thinking about doing, this is what we're thinking about going, this is what we're thinking about changing this or changing that, and what is your perspective? How do you think this is going to play out? How's this going to affect the future? How is this going to affect you and your business if we go this direction? So I would say in a lot of cases we came away without decisions, or really maybe not knowing what direction they are going to go, or something's going to change or not. But at times, we would go 6 months, a year later, and whatever we discussed actually, did end up, being changed or came to fruition. So
okay.
I think as long as you went into it with that kind of expectations, it can be fairly effective.
So maybe not so much decisions being made, but what type of things does the board have, the most influence on in terms of what the OEM ultimately decides? Are there certain areas that seemed you had a bigger impact than others?
Not necessarily. I wouldn't say that we had there wasn't one area or another that had a specific impact more than others. I think a lot of programming, product programming, product offering, I think it was probably a little bit more heavy on the product side.
Okay.
Than it was on maybe in some of the other areas of the business that we work with our OEM on, but we got just as much into those other areas as well. I would say the perspective of the OEM is, the fact that the way I always presented it to the group when I was chair is, this group is another way for senior leadership within the CNH organization to get information back to them in a way that maybe wasn't quite as filtered if it came up through the organization or through a third party or whatever. It just was another way for them to kind of get a feel for what was happening and or strategic decisions that they have to make. How do they think they're going to play out into the future?
All right. And then you mentioned earlier, there were some things that you thought went positively, some maybe not so much. Can you share some of those examples of your experience?
Yeah, I think first of all, any kind of organization or group like that, the group dynamics has a lot to do with how well something, works or doesn't work. And in most cases, we had a good group dynamic. You have to, at some level, the dealers and the OEMs have to check their ego at the door. You have to come into it with a little bit of, we're going to have some discussions here that can at times can be sensitive. And, especially when you go through the downturn in the ag economy that we had a few years ago in 2015, 2014, and 16, there were some really tough, it could be some tough discussions. And for the most part, I felt like everybody handled themselves very well. They kept the discussion strategically and there was good participation. So from that perspective, I thought it was positive. Negative, I think sometimes you get down into the weeds on something that was at the end of the, you have a discussion that maybe goes an hour, and at the end of the hour, you're like, oh boy, that was.
What did we just talk about for an hour?
Yeah, what did we just talk about? And it really doesn't mean anything, and we just wasted an hour of our time. So, but if it's going to be an open discussion, you're going to have some of those types of things happen where you go down a rabbit trail that felt like you wasted the last hour.
Yeah. What can dealers who are not part of their OEM's advisory board do to, make sure their opinion, their insights are being taken into account? How does the board work with, the wider dealer network?
Yeah, I think, that's a good question, because in a lot of cases, for some dealers, you're in competition with somebody in your local dealer. So that becomes a little bit of a challenge. They don't always feel comfortable telling you everything, and vice versa. But, I think, have a somewhat positive outlook towards your OEM. I know sometimes the dealer feels like they're at odds with their OEM supplier, and there feels like there can be this adverse relationship. And I would really encourage you to think of it differently than that. And I think, if you approach it in a way that, I'm here to try to build relationships with people that are either on the board, or somebody who is either another dealer or another person that's from the OEM, I think is your best avenue in order to help facilitate anything that you're trying to do, or at least get some information about what's happening, so you can predict or do some strategy from your own perspective. But I just think keeping an open mind and looking at it from other people's point of views, I think, is really helpful for dealers that aren't necessarily on the board.
Okay. And then we talked a little bit about, how it isn't necessarily real decision making that you guys are doing, but what would you say is another, the next biggest misconception people might have about what that role of the advisory board is?
That's a good question. Misconception. I think sometimes people feel like it's a way for the OEMs to strong arm the dealer organization into doing something that maybe they don't want to do.
Okay.
And I'm not saying there isn't any of that, but I think from what I saw in most of the meetings, the dealers were pretty, the dealers held their own in the discussions. In other words, it wasn't just the OEMs rolling over the dealers. The dealers that were in the meeting, if something wasn't looking like it was going to be a very positive thing for the dealer organization, I felt like the dealers were together in helping the OEM understand what the impact that's going to have on the dealer organization.
In those meetings, how much of it was OEM led versus dealer led? So, the OEM has these 10 issues they want to talk about in this meeting, versus the dealers brought these concerns to the table.
Yeah, I think probably different dealer organizations are different. Kind of what we did, what I thought worked fairly well. The dealers actually, we worked together ahead of time and put together our things that we wanted to discuss, top concerns, and we put that into a format that we gave to the chairman on the other side, the OEM on the other side, that ran the meeting. And we said these are the things that we wanted to talk about. These are the concerns we had, and then they added their stuff as their topics or things that they wanted to talk about, their initiatives they wanted to see happen. And we blended those together and came up with a agenda for the meeting, and usually worked out fairly well. Okay, so it was a mix of both sides. Dealer and OEM, yeah. And that's the way I think it should be. If it's just OEMs, kind of, bushing, and then the dealers don't feel like they don't have any, feel like they're a part of it. Right. Feel like we discuss things that need to be discussed. Okay. And so we talked about some of the positives that you saw, from how some of the things went. Any negatives to how things were structured that stand out? Yeah. Negative. I'm trying to. If sometimes, I would say there was times when we maybe felt like something was just kind of rushed through, or a discussion was rushed through.
Okay.
So that that should have had more discussion. Now, to the credit, a lot of times we brought that back at the end of the meeting and talked about it some more. But sometimes things got pushed through a discussion or challenge or an area that maybe could have took more time to have to get some more discussion around it. But I think for the most part, with the right facilitators and the right people, the people try to be their best at providing ample opportunity for people to discuss what the topic is.
Okay. Were the meetings facilitated by someone outside of the organization?
No, it was within somebody.
It was within, okay.
Yeah.
But someone was in charge of
Yeah.
organizing and everything. Okay.
That's
got
correct.
it. I think that was all I had. Anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I just want to encourage, if somebody else gets tapped on the shoulder to participate in something like this, I would just encourage you to do it.
Okay.
It is time out of your schedule. There is time that you have to spend either away from your family or away from your business. And you, you have to put some preparation into it as well. Mm-hmm. I would just encourage you to do it. I think, at least for myself, I take a lot of pride in our OEM that we represent. And I'm sure the other dealers take a lot of pride in the OEMs that they represent. So I think giving back to them and helping them to be better at what they do, that helps you, that turnaround that helps you as a dealer to be better, hopefully, or more effective is a positive thing. So I would just encourage people to take the time to participate in these kinds of things.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate the little bit of insight into how those advisory boards work.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us. Always nice to catch up with you.
Okay. Thank you.